Hello everyone. In the previous chapters, we saw how we can create our text, our titles, lists, and different types of links. Now it's time to start our formatting with CSS. We will therefore, in this chapter, see the basics of this language, and how to use it. First, CSS is constantly evolving, and you should know that no browser knows all its functions. Of course, they know most of it, but it may happen that they don't know some functions. But rest assured, if that were the case, they simply ignore the unrecognized function and display the default content without crashing your page. In short, we know how to put our texts. Let's see how we will be able to do our layout. As I told you at the very beginning of these tutorials, CSS complements HTML code. And this in three ways. Either in a separate file, or in the head of your page, or directly in the HTML markers. Don't worry, the CSS language is not more difficult than HTML. You must, on the other hand, know how and where to use it. Well, let's see that in detail. First, in an external file, which will be called by the HTML page. This system is most useful when you create a site composed of several pages, and generally, the bases of each page will be identical, such as the top of the page, the footer, often also the navigation list, the page background, the text style used, and therefore, to avoid creating the corresponding CSS code in each page, we will create a file containing the code, which will be called by each of the different pages. This will also allow you, if you decide to modify the color of the text, the wallpaper, your banner, to do so by modifying only the CSS file, and therefore, each of the pages will also be modified in a single operation. Here's how to set this up. First, let's open our text editor with our page, index.html. We will add a new line in the head, with the marker, link. As its name indicates, link, in English, it will allow us to link our page with the page containing the CSS code. This marker will contain three attributes. The first, rel, will indicate what type of file code we are going to call. Here it is CSS, so we give as value, style sheet. A second attribute will define the type of text used. It is the attribute, type, with the value, text/CSS. We add a third attribute, href, which is the same as for a link marker, to which we will give as value, the relative address of the page, exactly as for a relative link that we saw in the first part of the chapters devoted to links. We'll put our CSS file in the same folder as our home page, and we'll name it style.css, so we enter that name as the value for href. Well, that's it for the HTML file, so we can save it. And now let's make our CSS file. So let's open a new tab in our text editor. Then we're just going to add this little code. I'll explain this code later. For now we'll just do a test to understand the scope of the CSS. Once this code is done, save it as style.css in our base folder, test. If you are using Sublime Text, after saving the file it will now be colored in the editor. If we open the base folder, it should now contain the subfolder, content, our main page, index.html, and the CSS file, style.css. You will notice that the latter does not have the icon of your browser, like the HTML file, but an icon with a gear, showing that this file is an extension, or, with the icon of your text editor, and not that of an HTML page. Now double-click on our index.html file, and our browser will open displaying our page. Oh! Surprise! All paragraph texts are now written in blue. If now, we go back to our text editor, and we also insert the same line with the link marker, in our page, images.html, we have to modify the link address by adding the return to the main folder, like this. Then, we save it. Let's go back to our browser, and click on the link. My Images in the list on the home page, and Magical. Also, all the texts of the paragraphs of the page, Images, will also be written in blue. Well, as I just told you, we'll come back to the CSS code after having seen the other two possibilities for inserting the code into your pages. Let's see the second method. Directly in the head of your page. This is interesting, if the code will relate to a series of markers, but it will be different from one page to another. For example, I want an image X as the background of my main paragraph in my home page, with a text of such size and such color, but, in your images page, the background must be plain, and the text in another style. Then, we can set these different properties to each of the pages in their respective heads. Also, if your site will have only one page, you can also put the CSS code in the head of this one. Here's how. Let's go back to our text editor, to the index page. We will add a new line in the head, just after the one calling the CSS file, and we will add a marker in pair, style, and style. If you work with Sublime Text, it will automatically add the attribute type with the value text/CSS. Between the two markers, let's insert this command. Once done, save your index.html file, and refresh the index page in your browser. Oh! Now the titles of the different paragraphs are displayed in red. Good. Finally, let's see the third method, which consists of directly inserting the CSS code in an HTML marker. This method is only really recommended if this command will be unique to a single marker in your entire site. Let's see how to set it up. In our index page, we will modify the first line of the main list, like this. Then, after saving it, refresh the index page in your browser. Looking closely, indeed, the text, "Welcome," from the first line of the list, is now written in dark blue. Well, we have seen the different methods to insert CSS code, and you find that we can mix these three methods. Now let's see how the CSS code works. There are two different possibilities. The first is for CSS code written in a separate file, and for CSS code placed in the head of the page. Let's go back to the code that we put in the CSS file. Like the one in the head, it starts with the name of the marker we want to modify. In this case, this will modify all the markers of this type present in the page, for the code in the head, or all the pages for the CSS file, indicated. So here, we will modify all the p-type markers in all the pages, with the code from the CSS file, and all the h2 type markers contained in the current page, that is the index page, with the code in the head. The name of the marker is followed by a pair of braces, an opening and a closing, between which we will place one or several CSS commands. This command, or command sequence, will be composed of the CSS property. Here, in each example, we have the property color, or put in color, which will modify the color of the text contained in the designated marker, followed by a colon, and an attribute which will, in our case, define the color used, followed by a semicolon. The CSS code therefore informs the browser that it wants the content of such a marker to be colored in such a color. We can have several properties for the same marker. In this case, we will place them one after the other, not forgetting the semicolon at the end of each one, as in this schematic diagram. As a second possibility, for properties placed directly in a marker, we will only add the attribute style, and one or several function, and their values, as the value of the attribute style, like this, and not forgetting not the colon between the property and its value, and the semicolon after each value. Good. As for HTML, when your CSS code, either in a file or in the head, becomes imposing, it will then often be necessary to insert annotations to help us more easily locate ourselves in our coded These annotations are written a little different from those of HTML, but they are just as easy to use. Here's how to add them. The beginning, a sac followed by the multiplication symbol and a space. Your comment, which can be written on several lines. And the end, a space, followed by the multiplication symbol and a sac. As for HTML, a clear and well-detailed coding will certainly be very useful to you if you have to come back to your code sometime after having created it. That's it. We've seen the principle of inserting and using CSS, and in the next chapter we'll begin to see its more advanced application. Thank you for your attention. Katerina and Patrick.